The doorman who said no KeanuReeves stood at the grand entrance of one of the tallest towers in the city. The wind whipped around him, carrying the chill of late evening, making his long black coat flutter like a banner. People hurried by on the busy street, some doing a double take when they realized who he was, but most were too busy rushing to warmth and dinner tables to care. It was the kind of night when you wanted to be anywhere but outside. But Keanu had a reason to be here, standing under the glittering lights that spilled from the marble lobby of a $50 million penthouse he was about to visit. He looked up at the tower, glass and steel stretching toward the stars. Inside, the lights of the top floor were bright, the silhouette of an expensive chandelier dancing like a jewel. Keanu took a slow breath, adjusting the small box in his pocket. A simple gift wrapped in brown paper, nothing fancy. He had promised himself he would do this alone. No driver, no assistant, no cameras. Tonight was not about fame. It was about an old promise, an old debt he felt in his bones. He stepped forward toward the giant revolving doors. The doorman, dressed in a perfectly pressed navy uniform with gold buttons, stiffened as soon as he saw Keanu approach. The man's name tag read Michael, but his face carried no warmth, only suspicion, as if he had been waiting all night for someone to test his patience. "Excuse me, sir," Michael said sharply, stepping in front of the doors, blocking Keanu's way. "May I help you?" Keanu gave him a gentle smile, the kind that didn't ask for anything, just offered a quiet kindness in return. "I'm here to see Mr. Peterson, penthouse suite. He's expecting me." Michael's eyes flickered to the brown box, then back to Keanu's face. He frowned, studying him with the kind of doubt that people use when they think they're protecting something precious. "And you are Keanu," he said simply. The doorman's eyebrows lifted in disbelief, almost mocking. "Keanu Reeves, the actor." Keanu nodded, his smile unfazed by the cold tone. "Yes." Michael let out a short, dry laugh. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. We have strict security here." Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his old, worn wallet. He handed over his driver's license without complaint. Michael squinted at it under the golden lobby lights, turning it over like he expected it to be fake. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "Look, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but we have celebrities try to sneak in here all the time. Mr. Peterson didn't say anything about having guests tonight." Keanu felt the cold sink deeper into his bones, but he didn't raise his voice. He had learned long ago that anger only added to walls people built between each other. He spoke softly, like he was talking to a friend instead of a stranger trying to humiliate him. "I know it sounds strange, but I promised him I'd come tonight. If you could just call up, you'll see." Michael shook his head. "I don't have time for this. You're not on the list. Please step aside." A couple, dressed in shimmering clothes, walked up behind Keanu, laughing and tossing their car keys to another attendant. They recognized Keanu instantly, their eyes wide, but when they heard Michael's dismissive voice, they looked away awkwardly, pretending not to see what was unfolding. No one stepped in. "The city moved too fast for kindness sometimes." Keanu single quotes us, breath fogged in the cold air as he stood there, denied entry to a building where he could have bought the entire top floor 10 times over if he wanted to. But that wasn't who he was. He didn't drop names. He didn't demand to be treated like royalty. He didn't remind people who he was supposed to be. He just stood there, a man holding a simple box, with a promise he couldn't keep yet. Inside the penthouse, a frail old man named James Peterson sat in a soft armchair near the window. He was once a titan of real estate, the kind of man who built the towers that touch the clouds. Tonight, though, he was just a dying man, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for the only visitor who mattered. On his lap was an old photograph, him and a young Keanu, laughing over a cheap cup of diner coffee. James had given Keanu his first loan to buy a tiny apartment when he was broke and alone. That small act had changed everything. Tonight, Keanu wanted to repay him, not with money, but with a promise he had made years ago, to always show up when it mattered most. James turned to his nurse and asked for the 10th time, "Is he here yet?" "Did Keanu come?" The nurse checked. her phone but shook her head gently. "Not yet, sir. I'm sure he's on his way." Meanwhile, outside, Keanu finally stepped back, not wanting to argue. He looked Michael in the eyes, his voice calm but firm. "Please tell him I came. Tell him I didn't forget." The doorman didn't answer. He turned away, waving through. Another wealthy couple, nodding and smiling at them as if he hadn't just turned away one of the kindest souls to ever walk through that door. Keanu slipped the small box back into his coat pocket and walked away into the cold night. His breath was shaky, but his steps were steady. He knew this was not the end of it. He would find another way. When someone gives you a chance when you have nothing, you don't just walk away when it's inconvenient. You stand in the cold. You get denied, and then you come back, stronger, humbler, more determined to keep your promise. Behind him, the glittering tower stood tall, its lights mocking the truth that not every expensive wall keeps the right people out. Sometimes it keeps the right ones away. And in that moment, Keanu knew that the real penthouse wasn't the one at the top of the building. It was the space inside your heart where kindness lives. No matter how many doors are shut in your face, this was just the beginning. Asterisk the promise. That could not wait. Keanu walked for blocks that night, the city lights flickering around him like restless stars. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. He pulled the small brown box out of his coat pocket and turned it over in his hands. The paper was creased now, a corner slightly torn where he'd gripped it too tight. Inside was nothing fancy, no gold, no jewelry, nothing worth money to a man like James Peterson who had built towers worth millions. It was something worth far more than money, a promise wrapped in paper. He remembered the night he made that promise. It was so many years ago. He had been sleeping in a tiny room in a run-down building that smelled of old carpet and cigarettes. His acting career was nothing back then, just auditions and rejection letters and the silence of empty phones. He was young and afraid, but one evening, at a diner that stayed open all night, he met James Peterson. Back then, James was already a man with power and wealth, but that night he looked tired, like the city had drained him of something soft and human. They started talking over stale coffee and leftover pie. Keanu spoke about movies and dreams. James spoke about regrets and second chances. When dawn broke over the cracked diner window, James scribbled a name and number on a napkin and pressed it into Keanu's hand. "If you ever need a roof over your head," James said, "call me. Sometimes all you need is one chance. But when you make it, promise me something." Keanu, half asleep and half hopeful, asked him what promise. "Promise me that when someone else needs you, you won't close your door." Keanu had carried that promise like a stone in his pocket ever since. Now, standing alone under a flickering streetlight, he felt that stone grow heavier. He knew James was waiting in that penthouse, waiting to say goodbye. He couldn't stand the thought that the last thing James would remember was an unanswered promise. At the door of a building that only cared about money and status, he pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted when the world felt too cold. The line rang twice before a soft voice answered. "Keanu, you okay?" It was Claire, an old friend who had worked with him on films for years. Claire had a way of seeing through all the fame and fortune. She saw the man who still wondered if he was enough. "Claire," he said, his voice rough. "They wouldn't let me in. The doorman, he didn't believe me." She didn't say the usual things like "I'm sorry" or "that's terrible." Instead, she asked, "Do you want me to come get you?" Keanu felt something warm settle in his chest. "No, but I need your help." Claire's voice was steady. "Tell me." Within an hour, Claire pulled up in her old car, the one with a cracked windshield and a heater that rattled when it blew warm air. She found Keanu sitting on the steps of a closed bookstore, the small box beside him. She didn't ask questions. She just sat down next to him, her coat wrapped tight against the wind. "You're not going home tonight, are you?" she asked. Keanu shook his head. "He's alone up there. He's waiting. I can't just walk away." Claire leaned her shoulder against his. "Then we find another way in." They talked about options. Maybe call the building manager, maybe find someone who could vouch for him. But it was nearly midnight now, and the tower felt like a fortress guarded by people who saw only dollar signs, not hearts. Then Claire looked at him with a small, mischievous smile. What about the back? Service entrance? Buildings like that have staff coming in and out all the time. Keanu's eyes widened. He almost laughed. You want me to sneak in, like a teenager? Claire grinned, her breath visible in the freezing air. No, I want you to keep a promise. Sometimes the door people open for you is not the front door. So they walked together, slipping down the alley behind the tower. The back entrance was less grand than the gold and glass revolving doors out front. Just a steel door propped open for a janitor taking out the trash. The man looked at them with tired eyes, his uniform sleeves stained with bleach. Keanu stepped forward, voice humble. Hey, my name's Keanu. I need to see James Peterson. He's family to me. The janitor stared at him for a moment. His eyes darted between Keanu's face and Claire's, reading the truth in their eyes. He didn't ask for ID, didn't make them explain. He simply nodded and held the door open. Go on, man. The janitor said, sometimes the right people show up when the fancy ones don't. Inside, the back hall smelled of cleaning chemicals and stale air. The elevator at the end of the hallway was old but fast. As the doors closed behind them, Claire squeezed Keanu's hand. You kept your promise. Keanu looked down at the box in his other hand. Not yet, but I will. The elevator climbed floor after floor, the numbers blinking past. Each ding felt like a heartbeat echoing in his chest. By the time they reached the top, Keanu felt ready, not as a celebrity, not as a man with money and fame, but as a simple friend coming home to say goodbye. When the doors slid open, the hallway was silent, carpet thick under their feet. They walked to the penthouse door, where a nurse looked up in surprise. Mr. Reeves, she whispered. He's been asking for you. Keanu stepped in, the box clutched to his chest like a lifeline. James Peterson, frail and fading, opened his eyes and smiled when he saw him. You came, James rasped. Keanu dropped to his knees beside the old man's chair, tears burning his eyes. I promised. James chuckled weakly. And you kept it. Keanu reached into the box and pulled out an old diner mug, the same one they had drunk coffee from that first night. Taped inside the mug was the napkin with the faded phone number. Keanu placed it in James's trembling hands. I never forgot, he said softly, and I never will. In that moment, it didn't matter how many doors had shut him out. The right door was always open when you carried kindness with you. Sometimes you have to find your own way in, through alleys, through kindness, through the back door no one else sees. And that night, the promise was kept. The truth behind closed doors. The room was warm, but heavy with the hush that always comes when you know someone is close to leaving this world. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual noise. Cars honking, neon lights flickering, laughter drifting up from the street. But inside the penthouse, everything felt softer, like time had decided to slow down just for them. Keanu sat on the floor next to James Peterson's chair, his knees pulled up, one hand resting lightly on the old man's arm so he could feel the gentle rise and fall of each breath. Claire sat nearby, not saying a word, her presence like a soft blanket around them both. James looked at the old diner mug resting in his lap, the napkin inside barely holding its shape after all these years. He traced the faded ink with his finger, his eyes glassy with memories. Do you know why I kept this? He asked Keanu, his voice no louder than a whisper. Keanu looked at him with a smile that was more sad than happy. To remind yourself. You gave someone a chance. James shook his head slowly, a tiny smile flickering across his dry lips. No, to remind myself that sometimes giving someone a chance saves you too. I was lonely that night, Keanu, so tired of people wanting my money, my name. You were the first person who just sat with me, talked about life, dreams, not business. Keanu felt his chest tighten. All those years he'd thought he owed James so much, when the truth was, maybe they had saved each other that night, in that tiny diner, over cheap coffee and broken dreams. Maybe that was why promises like these mattered. They reminded you that kindness wasn't one-sided. It was a bridge both people walked over, meeting in the middle. The nurse stepped in quietly and placed a soft blanket over James's shoulders. She smiled at Keanu, her eyes kind but full of questions she didn't ask out loud. She had seen people come and go, family members, lawyers, big names, but none had sat like this, on the floor, holding the old man's hand like a son saying goodbye to a father. When she left, James turned his eyes back to Keanu. "Tell me something, son, when you stood at that door downstairs and they wouldn't let you in. Did you feel angry?" Keanu let out a soft breath, remembering the doorman's cold eyes, the way people had looked away instead of standing up. For him, maybe for a moment, but more than that, I felt sad. That people still see money and status before they see a person. James nodded, his eyelids fluttering. That's what kills a man long before he dies. Not sickness, not age, but the loneliness of being seen as what you own instead of who you are. Keanu felt those words sink deep, lodging themselves somewhere he knew he would carry them forever. He wanted to promise James that he would never become that kind of man, that no matter how high he climbed, he would always sit on the floor, if that's where kindness lived. After a while, James dozed off, the mug still resting in his hands. Claire motioned for Keanu to stand, giving the old man space to rest. They stepped into the hallway, the plush carpet swallowing their footsteps. They stood side by side, looking out at the glittering skyline that stretched far beyond what eyes could see. "You did good," Claire whispered, nudging Keanu's shoulder. "You kept your promise." Keanu shook his head. "Not yet. There's one more thing." Claire turned to him, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" Keanu leaned against the wall, the tension easing from his shoulders now that he knew James was resting. "The doorman downstairs, Michael, he thinks he did his job right tonight, but he missed the truth." Claire tilted her head, curious. "You're not mad at him?" Keanu's eyes softened. "No, but maybe he needs to understand that doors aren't just wood and glass, they're people. How we open or close them matters more than the keys in our pockets." When James's nurse came out to check on him, Keanu asked her for a favor, to call Michael upstairs. The nurse looked surprised, but agreed. Within minutes, Michael stepped into the hallway, his uniform still perfect, but his expression tense. He kept his eyes down, clearly uncomfortable facing the man he had turned away just hours ago. Keanu didn't want to humiliate him. He knew too well how the world could crush people who were just trying to do their jobs. So he waited until Michael looked up, then said gently, "I know you were doing your job tonight. I get it. You see all kinds of people trying to get close. To people like James, you were trying to protect him." Michael shifted on his feet, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. I thought I was doing the right thing." Keanu stepped closer, not in anger but with quiet strength. "But sometimes, doing the right thing isn't about following rules. Sometimes it's about seeing the person standing in front of you. I didn't come here tonight because I'm famous. I came here because I'm a friend, because I made a promise." Michael's eyes glistened as he nodded, shame and relief fighting for space on his face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves. Truly." Keanu put a hand on his shoulder, the same way he had with James years ago. "Next time, Michael, open the door, not because someone is rich or on a list, but because sometimes the right people look ordinary, and sometimes they're standing in the cold, waiting to keep a promise." Claire watched the exchange, her heart swelling with something close to pride. In that moment, she understood why Keanu was different, why people loved him beyond his movies. Because when the world tried to shut him out, he never shut people out in return. He chose to open doors instead. As they stepped back inside James's suite, Keanu glanced at Michael one last time and smiled. "Thank you for coming up." When the door closed behind them, Michael stood alone in the hallway for a long time. He thought about every time he had turned someone away without looking in their eyes. He promised himself he would do better, because tonight, he hadn't just guarded a penthouse. He had learned what it really meant to guard a heart. And downstairs, the grand revolving doors spun on, but for the first time in a long time. Maybe they were open to more than just the rich and powerful. Maybe they were open to the truth. When a goodbye becomes a lesson, night grew deeper, and the city outside the penthouse windows seemed to hold its breath. The traffic below slowed to a quiet hum, the glow of distant signs flickering like stars that refused to go out. Inside, The air felt warmer somehow, softer. Keanu sat beside James Peterson's bed now, the old man too weak to stay in his chair any longer. The nurse had helped him settle under thick blankets, but his hands still rested on the old diner mug like it was a lifeline to a memory that mattered more than all the riches he had built. Claire sat nearby, her eyes drifting from James's pale face to Keanu's calm, steady presence. She didn't say much. She knew some moments didn't need words. Just the quiet comfort of someone being there when the world felt too big and too cold. James opened his eyes now and then, cloudy with sleep but still sharp enough to find Keanu every time. Once, he smiled, that soft, knowing smile that said, "I see you, I'm glad you're here." Then he'd drift off again, his breath slow but fragile. When he woke again, he looked at Keanu, voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Do you remember the story I told you about my first building?" Keanu chuckled. "The sound warm and low, the one that almost fell apart because you trusted the wrong people." James grinned, his eyes shining at the memory. "Yes, I thought money would buy me loyalty, but the people I paid to stand by me were the first to walk away when it got hard. I learned then, you don't build trust with money, you build it with your heart, with promises you keep." Keanu squeezed his hand gently. "You did that for me." James's breath rattled, but his eyes softened. "And you did it for me tonight. When they shut the door, you didn't give up." Keanu's eyes burned. He thought about how easy it would have been to walk away. He could have blamed the doorman, the city, the system that decides who is worthy to step through shiny glass doors. But instead he chose to stay, to find another way. And now, sitting here, he understood something he hadn't when he was standing in that cold street. Sometimes the test isn't whether you can open the door. It's whether you'll keep knocking when it stays shut. The nurse stepped in to check on James again, her movements gentle as she adjusted his blanket. She gave Keanu a look, not of pity, but of respect, as if she knew how rare it was for someone like him to sit here for hours. No cameras, no press, just a promise and a heart that refused to leave. James turned his head slightly toward the nurse. "Do you know, Keanu here once bought breakfast for an entire diner, back when he barely had enough to pay his rent." The nurse's eyes widened. She looked at Keanu with a soft smile. "Is that true?" Keanu shrugged, almost embarrassed. "It was nothing. People were cold. They needed a meal." James let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. When he caught his breath, he looked at the nurse. "That's who he is. That's why I gave him that first loan. Not because he was special, but because he was kind." Keanu felt his chest tighten. All these years, people wrote stories about his fame, his money, the roles he played. But they didn't know that the real story was made up of these small moments: a cup of coffee, a meal shared, a door held open. Tiny acts of kindness that built a life more valuable than all the penthouses in the world. James's eyes fluttered shut again, his hand still holding Keanu's. Claire stood and gently placed her hand on Keanu's shoulder. "Do you want me to give you to a minute?" she whispered. Keanu shook his head. "Stay. You're part of this too." James's voice cracked through the quiet, weaker than before. "When I'm gone, promise me you'll keep the door open, not the doors. With locks and guards, the doors inside you." Keanu's throat felt raw, his words barely a whisper. "I promise." James smiled. It was small, but it carried decades of trust. "That's enough." The nurse stepped back, letting the silence settle like a blessing. For a while, no one spoke. The lights of the city blinked on and off, like the world was trying to remind them that life keeps moving, even when a goodbye sits heavy in your chest. Keanu leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against James's fragile hand. He breathed. In the moment, the warmth, the truth, the weight of a promise kept not with money, but with a simple act of showing up. When James finally drifted into a sleep he would not wake from, there was no grand speech, no final word to sum up a life. There was only the steady beating of a promise that would keep echoing long after the doors of that $50 million penthouse closed. And deep in his heart, Keanu knew that what he had given tonight was worth more than anything that tower of glass and gold could ever hold. The man at the door. The morning after James Peterson's passing, the city woke up the way it always did, too fast, too busy. People rushing to places that sometimes didn't really matter at all. The sun rose behind the towers, bouncing off the steel and glass like it was trying to break through walls. People had built around themselves inside the penthouse. The warmth that had filled the room the night before lingered like a ghost of something good. Keanu sat quietly by the window, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he hadn't touched. Claire dozed off in a chair across the room, her head resting on her arm, her hair falling into her face. The nurse moved softly, covering James's body with a fresh blanket, whispering a quiet prayer before she stepped away to give them space. There was no rush now. No one was coming to fight over money or things. James had made it clear in his final days. His true legacy wasn't the tower or the penthouse or the bank accounts. It was the people whose lives he had touched with simple moments of trust and kindness. Keanu looked around the room, his eyes landing on the old diner mug still sitting on the bedside table. The napkin inside had slipped out, half tucked under the lamp. He reached for it, smoothing the crumpled paper with his fingertips. The faded number reminded him of where he started, of the nights he lay awake wondering if anyone would believe in him. It reminded him that sometimes one person saying yes when the world says no can change a life forever. A soft knock at the door broke the hush. Claire stirred awake as Keanu stood to answer it. He opened the door and found Michael, the doorman, standing there. His uniform was crisp as ever, but his eyes looked different now, less guarded, more human. "Mr. Reeves," Michael said, his voice quiet, respectful. "I heard. I'm sorry for your loss." Keanu nodded, letting the door swing open a bit wider. "Thank you." Michael shifted on his feet, his hands clasped in front of him like a boy waiting for the principal. "I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what you said, about doors not being just glass and wood." Keanu raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I wanted to say thank you," Michael continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Not for forgiving me, though I'm grateful for that too, but for reminding me why I took this job. My father used to be a doorman. He taught me that you never really guard the building, you guard the people inside. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Keanu felt a small warmth bloom in his chest. "You remembered now, that's what matters." Michael's eyes flicked past Keanu's shoulder to the room behind him. Did he go peacefully?" "Yes," Keanu said softly. He knew he wasn't alone. Michael looked down at his polished shoes, the shine catching the morning light. "When I was training, my dad told me a story. He said he once opened the door for a stranger who didn't look like he belonged. Everyone else told him to turn the man away. But my dad said he looked in the man's eyes and saw something honest, something that needed a chance, so he let him in. That man turned out to be the building's owner in disguise, testing who he could trust." Keanu smiled, seeing the shape of it. "So your father passed his test?" Michael nodded, his eyes glassy. "I failed mine that night, but you gave me a second chance to open the door the right way." Keanu reached out, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder, the same way he had touched James's hand, the same way someone had touched his shoulder all those years ago when he needed to be reminded that people could be kind sometimes. "We all need to remember, doors open from both sides." Michael stood a little straighter, like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. "If you ever need to come back here to remember him, you'll never be turned away again." Keanu nodded, gratitude deep in his chest. "I know." When Michael left, Claire joined Keanu by the window. They stood side by side, looking out at the city waking up. People rushed down below. Cars honked, deals were being made behind glass walls. But up here, it felt different, like they were seeing something other people missed. He was more than his money. Claire said quietly, resting her head on Keanu's shoulder. "He was," Keanu agreed. "But the world will try to write him off that way." "Maybe not," Claire said. "Maybe you should tell the real story." Keanu turned to her, a question in his eyes. "You don't have to tell people how rich he was," she continued. "Tell them how kind he was, how he gave you a chance when you had nothing, how he didn't shut the door on you, and how you didn't shut the door on him, even when they tried to keep you out." Keanu felt something shift inside him, not anger, not grief, but a kind of gentle determination. He knew people would gossip about the penthouse, the millions, the building that might go to new owners, but maybe, just maybe, they'd hear the real story too, a story about a man who built more than towers. He built a bridge for one young dreamer to cross over when he needed it most. And now that bridge could carry more people, all because one promise had been kept. Asterisk a door that stays open days turned into weeks after James Peterson's quiet passing. The city barely paused to notice when a man like him left the world. The headlines were quick. Real estate tycoon passes at 87, but none of them told the truth that Keanu now carried in his chest like a warm stone. They didn't write about the broken nights in a diner or the napkin with a number, or the soft promise passed between two men who understood that sometimes kindness was more valuable than anything built from steel and glass. Keanu went back to his own life, film sets, interviews, the smiling faces asking him about his next big project. But behind every bright camera light, he held the story of that night in the penthouse close. It was never about telling the world that he had money, or that he could buy that building 10 times over if he wanted to. It was about telling the world what he could never buy. The trust of someone who had once believed in him for nothing more than the truth in his eyes. One evening, after a long day of filming, Keanu found himself standing outside that same tower again. The grand revolving doors spun endlessly as fancy cars dropped off people in expensive suits. He watched as Michael, the doorman, opened the door for each one, his posture calm, his eyes different now, softer, more open. Michael spotted him and stepped forward immediately, his face breaking into a quiet, respectful smile. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice steady but warm, "you coming in tonight?" Keanu looked past him, up at the floors that reached for the sky. He could almost see James at the window, waving him up like before. He felt the small box in his pocket. Again, not the same box from that night, but another wrapped in the same brown paper. Inside was the old napkin, sealed in a simple frame. He planned to leave it there, tucked in a corner of James's old study. A reminder for whoever lived there next that sometimes the most priceless thing in a place was not the marble floors or the view, but the promises kept inside its walls. He nodded at Michael. Just for a minute, Michael held the door open, his hand resting on the frame like he was guarding something sacred. "Anytime. You're always welcome here." Keanu stepped inside. The lobby gleamed under the soft golden lights. It all looked the same, the polished floors, the cold beauty of money. But he knew now that real wealth lived in the corners no one noticed. In the janitor who held the door open when others shut it. In the nurse who stayed late so a dying man wouldn't be alone. In the doorman who learned that guarding a door means more than checking a list. He took the elevator to the top floor alone when the doors opened. The penthouse felt different, empty, but not cold. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets waiting for someone new to claim them. Keanu walked to James's favorite chair by the window. The city lights blinked back at him, alive and moving, as if reminding him that the world never stops no matter who stays or goes. He placed the small framed napkin on the table next to the chair. He whispered, "Thank you, old friend," to the silence. No grand speech, no dramatic goodbye, just gratitude, deep and true. When he turned to leave, he found Claire waiting at the door. She had come up quietly, not wanting to break the moment. They walked down the hallway together, their footsteps echoing off the marble walls. "Are you going to tell the story?" she asked him as they reached the elevator. Keanu thought for a second, then nodded. Not about the money, not about the penthouse, about the promise, about the door. Claire smiled. "The right people will listen." "Yeah," Keanu said softly, "and maybe it will help them open their own doors. Maybe that's enough." When they stepped back into the lobby, Michael was still there, standing tall but relaxed now. He watched them pass, giving a small nod that meant more than words. And when the next stranger came through, someone who looked tired, a delivery guy carrying bags of food, Michael held the door open wide, eyes kind, no questions asked. A small act that might mean nothing to some, but could mean everything to the right person. As Keanu and Claire walked back into the city night, the cold air wrapped around them like a fresh beginning. People brushed past, horns blared, neon signs blinked. Life went on, loud and messy, full of doors that people shut and others that people opened when it matters most. And somewhere high above the street, in a tower that touched the clouds, a small framed napkin sat waiting for the next person who needed to remember. That one yes can change a life, and one promise kept can keep a door open forever.